Now, Cheltenham Races is just around the corner. We're looking forward to 4 days of rollicking action. Now, other people may put it more eloquently than that. One who certainly will is Richard Hoiles. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Not so bad, Jason. It's the calm before the storm, isn't it? All our bets are still potentially winning ones.
Well, absolutely. Now, for the few that don't know, you are the race caller, you're the commentator, but much more than that, isn't it? You have a far more involved role in the proceedings and the TV broadcast itself.
Yeah, I mean, I do the commentaries, but yes, we're sort of a team where we put all the info that we've got, in the table, and also we've got, runners and riders and little snippets here and there. So yes, it's very much a collective effort. We all contribute, and whoever is in the best place to use the info takes it. But yes, it's definitely a team effort. But there's plenty of info to try and get across during the course of Cheltenham.
Yeah, no mean judge, that's for sure. And now, just to set the scene, Clerk of the Course, John Pullin, I mean, he must have been through the gamut of emotions over the last few weeks, but fingers crossed, it's all looking at the moment pretty good.
Yeah, I think he's probably relieved now that he doesn't have to water because the forecast has sufficient rain in it for him not to want to interfere, I presume. I don't think the grass growth is fantastic, particularly on the new course on Thursday and Friday. But as we stand at the moment, we're good to soft, still the odd good place in the new course, and they still say they want some more rain for that. The forecast is mixed, depending on what you look at. We should get rain on at least 2 or 3 of the days and then quieter towards the end. So I think we can just work on the parameters of round about good to soft ground, maybe edging towards soft once it gets turned over if it rains during the week.
Just very quickly for the uninitiated, basically Cheltenham has, well, I was going to say 2 courses, but effectively 3 with the cross country as well.
Yes, so the old course, if you think of that as the speed course, it's sharper. There's 1 less fence per circuit, and it's in use for the first 2 days, which is in line with the speed races. So you get the champion hurdle on day 1, and you get the Queen Mother on day 2, with things like the Arkle thrown in as well. When we get to the next 2, the Thursday and the Friday, it's the new course that is more galloping in nature, which makes it more stamina test, an extra fence per circuit. And that's the one that's used for the stamina races, so the Stayers and the Gold Cup. So basically, the speed races are on the old course, which is speed, the new course, and the cross country, they go round and round in ever decreasing circles, and one of them wins.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Cheltenham is very much a statistician's dream, isn't it? And, Willie Mullins is good with the ladies for the more prurient watching. I mean, he does very well in mares racing. Is that something you take an awful lot of notice of?
Stats abound at the Cheltenham Festival. Anyone who's been to any of the preview nights will know you get quoted lots of them. I can guarantee the record of Challow winners will get a good run with Hermes Allen trying to break that. The record of Corto Star winners, none of them win. These are the stats that come out. Even, of course, Constitution Hill will be the first horse since Beulah in 1971 or something like that to win the Supreme and then go on to win the Champion Hurdle. But of course, you have to bear in mind the horses that are involved, and you have to bear in mind the way things change. There's a lot more Irish runners in the handicaps than there were even 5 years ago, and that for me makes it a little bit harder. I used to be pretty comfortable with all of the handicaps and my approach to them, but I don't know the Irish form as well. So statistics are important, but you have to work out whether they're actually meaningful or whether they're just coincidental, because quite a lot of the time they are just the latter.
And Richard, we obviously look at things, or tend to look at things from a betting point of view, but Cheltenham really is just to be embraced and enjoyed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the point. More is spoken about these 28 races over the course of 4 days than any others in the calendar, and yet they, in many issues, are some of the most unsolvable ones. And yet we believe that we can find our way to a 16-1 winner and a handicap. The overall quality is what's to be embraced, and sometimes it is not about the betting. Constitution Hill we'll be talking about, obviously, in the Champion Hurdle is a case in point. It is about seeing the top stars in our sport, both human and equine, pitting their wits against each other in one of the most spectacular amphitheatres that sport can provide. And even though we tend to assess our Cheltenham Festival and whether we're up or down on the week, I think sometimes we need to take a step back and just salute the stars of our sport and hope that they all shine during the course of the 4 days.
Now, I'm joined by Richard Hoiles, who's very kindly taken us through Cheltenham, and we do need the guidance. We're going to look at the championship races kicking off on Tuesday, of course, with the Champion Hurdle, and kicking off with a behemoth, which is Constitution Hill.
Yes, in terms of, I'm hopeful that even I might tip a winner today to get us underway. And it's not really about the betting in terms of the horse that should win. The strange thing about Constitution Hill is how quickly he's risen to prominence, I think. He's only had 5 career starts. He was raised into a Grade 1 no sooner than his second start when he won the Tolworth, which isn't always the strongest race in the world, to be honest. But then the bandwagon rolled on, and he was so dominant, of course, in the Supreme last year. And now he would be the highest profile horse in the sport. He hasn't yet won a championship race, one of the real top ones that we've been discussing, but his form and the way he's dismissed the opposition suggests, in theory, it should be more or less a formality, although maybe connections of State Man would disagree. The issue for him is that he could win by 2 lengths and everyone would be disappointed. And yet I'm sure connections would be absolutely delighted. So he is the potential star on show, head and shoulders above. But in terms of betting perspective, you're probably going to need to box a little cleverer. The without Constitution Hill market is probably the most sensible one to look at, but then State Man is similarly short. I possibly would suggest, if you did want to bet in this race, that including Vauban in the without market might be the way to go. I think he's been brought along steadily. He's obviously won at the festival before, which I always like. And even though the 5-year-olds historically have a bad record in winning the Champion Hurdle, one of those stats we were talking about a moment or two ago, quite a lot of them have come quite close. So if you were forcing me to approach it from a betting perspective, it would be Vauban in the market without Constitution Hill. But my heart is hoping that he finishes second to Constitution Hill, beaten 15 lengths, and Constitution Hill proves everybody right, and all of those, all the talking proves justified.
I mean, his reputation is such that he is, and I think in some cases unfairly, it's been labelled others that they're running scared and taking on alternatives. Honeysuckle, who we don't know 100% won't run, it should be said, but a few others are taking, well, certainly on paper, easier engagements. What's your views on that?
Well, I think if I was owning Honeysuckle, I'm surprised she has run at the festival. I'm delighted she has. Hopefully everything will be fine and we can give her the reception that she deserves. She doesn't look the same horse this year, and she was held by State Man. And I think connections wisely have decided that she's either regressing, which I think is the case. And so being taken out of her comfort zone early on in the Champion Hurdle probably means for me the Mares is a plausible alternative. I don't see what she's got to gain by winning the Mares other than us giving her a really good send-off, and that's my problem. But if she is a stride or two slower, then I would worry that putting her in that race, potentially increases the chance of her capsizing. She nearly came down the other day. She's still very fluent at her hurdles, but you can only beat, the class that's in front of you. Isterbrack used to beat what we would suggest is second grade hurdlers every single year and is still viewed as a great. I think for Constitution Hill, State Man will give him potentially more of a race than he's had so far. I don't think he'll be massively impressive because I don't think at this stage they'll want him to be. I think they will want him to win and ensure they win. The great advantage is his tactical versatility. Reportedly, he's one of the least imposing horses at Seven Barrows. You wouldn't pick him out of an identity parade. You wouldn't pick him out until he gets in the gallops. And then all of a sudden there's a little switch that gets flicked and he knows exactly what to do. And that makes him very hard to beat. He's won on heavy ground. Good to soft ground won't be a problem. He doesn't have to lead. He's got push button sort of tactical speed. So it's hard to find a flaw in him at this stage, but this is going to be his hardest test. So let's hope he can come through it and prove himself. The other horse, I suppose, I should give a passing mention to is I Like to Move It, who won the Greatwood in really good style. Nigel Tristan Davis's horse is coming into form round about the right time. If you're looking for another each way one along with Vauban, they are 2 potentials. But you're really just beginning to sort of find a way of getting into that market rather than believing you're going to tip a winner.
Yeah, I Like to Move It. Not just the Greatwood, but Greatwood of top weight as well.
Yes, and you can forgive him. I think the blip in between Cheltenham and Wincanton, because they tried him over a longer trip and they tried holding him up. He was actually due to run in a race the previous week that had been abandoned. So I think you can forgive him the one indiscretion in between. And again, he's got good course form, not at the festival, admittedly, but the Greatwood is a race that historically down the Isrooster Booster won it before going on for a Champion Hurdle, and it's thrown up other good horses that have run well at Cheltenham. So if we're going to have another horse behind Constitution Hill, it's one of the races we can wave the English flag slightly more proudly. There are plenty we can't. Then maybe those are horses to consider. But it would be slightly disappointing if Constitution Hill didn't win, albeit that we've created the hype by which he's being assessed rather than the horse himself.
I'm talking to Richard Hoiles, who's very kindly helping us with our Cheltenham preparations. We're going to look at the Queen Mother Champion, or talk about the Queen Mother Champion chase now. Energumene and Edwardstone. Not 100% sure which of those two will go off favourite, but both turned over, of course, in the Clarence House.
Yes, by Editor du Gite, who had been beaten in a handicap just a couple of runs before. And most people presumed when he won at Kempton, Edwardstone was a short price favourite and got rid of Tom Cannon early on in the race, that he'd just taken his opportunity that way. He's a fantastic jumper, Editor du Gite, and if anything, maybe the sharper old course will help his style. He gets into a good rhythm, and you do have to be relatively handy on the old course because it's not that easy to make ground when you swing into the straight. Edwardstone came to beat him the other day and didn't. But that was partly because I think he'd been watching Energumene, who was a little bit further back than Editor du Gite, and suddenly realised that, actual fact, the one he had to beat was already 3 or 4 lengths in advance of him. It's a fascinating race, this, because I think you can make plausible arguments for all of the three. I didn't believe Willie Mullin's excuse for Energumene about the fact that they've now painted the fences white in this country and Energumene didn't take to it. But I do know for certain from speaking to Danny Mullins the other day that the very following day, the whole of Close Sutton was painted white, and all his fences and hurdles are now resplendent in the same colour that Energumene will face the other day. I would stick with Energumene, just on the grounds that he has been there and done it. I know you can poke holes in his form line, and to be fair to Edwardstone, of course, he did win the Arkle, so he has also done it at the festival. But I just feel he has the proven class at the moment. Edwardstone was very impressive in the Tingle Creek. I was impressed by his turn of foot that day, but his jumping is not without blemish. Energumene didn't get into the same sort of rhythm in terms of being a bit fired up, I think, last time. And I think if he's ridden more patiently, I can see him being strongest up the hill.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because wind back 12 months, Energumene, obviously it was the Energumene Shishkin clash, but Paul Town had absolutely tactical brilliance. Now Shishkin unfortunately pulled up, but even prior to that, he was quite keen to hold him up, not just hold him up, but hold him up wide as well. So supreme confidence.
Yes, I mean, some will point out to the fact he jumps out to the right slightly, which I do understand, but given that he's already won a Queen Mother, would worry me far less than when he hadn't been to the festival 12 months ago. I do accept that if you look through his career records, he's often benefited from horses running below par, but he's also beaten quite a few of them towards the back end of last year after he won at the festival. So I just think it's one of those, it's sort of recency bias where punters drop off one bad run and don't really look at the overall body of work. And I think if you do look at the overall body of work, you should make Energumene favourite. That doesn't mean he'll win, but I do think he comes into the race with the overall best career form. Edwardstone, lovable though he is, had a slight setback, which meant he didn't run once in February. He can be quite fresh. He was always a buzzy horse, and I'll be interested to see how he handles the preliminaries. Editor du Gite, I just feel they won't give him the same amount of rope, and I don't think he can jump any better than he did last time, which means you can't sort of find an extra half length or a length with his jumping. And he's got one less fence to take, moving back to the old course from the new course of the Clarence House. Gentleman de Me is quite interesting. I thought he was a spring horse. Danny Mullins was keen to tell me the other day that he just needs a couple of races to get his eye in, and he's had those races earlier on in the season. And of course, he was quite impressive over in Ireland last time. Outside those, I can't see it. I do think it will be, can be clever and say a horse that begins with E. That doesn't narrow it down too much in the front of the market. But I'll go with Energumene, reigning champion, to go off favourite and to beat Edwardstone.
And just briefly, Richard, this is the type of race that may well be betting on who goes off favourite. I imagine a certain Tony Bloom might have a hand in that.
Yes, absolutely. There's a few big punters during the course of the week. JP McManus will be one. Tony Bloom would definitely be another. It's interesting that Ruby Walsh at some of the previews, I know, has been napping Edwardstone, which people have taken as a negative for Energumene, and he may well know something that I don't in that sense. But yes, whether or not the Brighton owner steps forward to put his cards on the table, almost literally in some of his previous existences, then I think that'll dictate. If Energumene's strong in the market, I would view that as a positive. But I'm pretty sure that some of the lumpy bets that were left behind the other day when he got beaten at Cheltenham possibly need recouping.
I'm talking to Richard Hoiles, who's very kindly helping us out with the big races and more at the Cheltenham Festival. Moving on to Thursday and the Stayers Hurdle. Now, Richard, our traditionally always thought the Stayers Hurdle as being a bit of a favourite race in some ways, but I've been brought up in the likes of Barracuda and Big Bucks. But of the last 7 runnings, I'm falling into stat mode here, 5 of them have produced double-figure prize winners.
Yes, and I think one of those was Flooring Porter, wasn't he? I think he was double figures the first time, is that right? But not the second. It's an interesting race in the sense that this year in particular, no dominant stayer has really emerged. Hence the reason Blazing Cal is favourite off the back of just that one run in Ireland. Great return to action. But, you know, rumours that he didn't come out of the race particularly brilliantly, according to his trainer. I have to say, with Charles Burns, in a way, there's lots of potential smokes and mirrors there down the line. And maybe if Charles isn't being as bullish, I would take that not necessarily as a negative. But he has been installed as favourite in most lists off the back of that. You've got Tihupu, whose credibility has improved since he's gone up in trip, and the defeat, of course, of Honeysuckle. But maybe Honeysuckle regressed rather than Tihupu really stepping forward. And then you've got old Flooring Porter, you know, who sat in front for the last 2, had brilliant rides on both occasions. But because he never goes off favourite and everyone thinks he's got a hole, and they sort of let him do it again. And so to make your point, he wasn't favourite in either of those 2 victories. And you're right, this is a race where horses win it on multiple occasions. And I really do think he is worthy of respect. He's no better than 3rd or 4th in. The big question, I suppose, at the time of speaking is whether or not Marie's Rock will come here. She's in the Stayers, she's in the Mares, she won the Mares last year. Nikki Henderson is very, very hopeful she'll come for the Stayers. The owners, I believe, aren't quite so certain. But if Epatante, who was supplemented for the Mares, goes there, then Nikki would obviously like to split his aces and send Marie's Rock for the Stayers. I think the connections basically believe that the Mares is what you won last year. But it was pointed out to me at a preview even the other night, there's a big prize money difference between this, over 100,000. And that might focus their minds of Marie's Rock if they're being slightly pushed away from the Mares. It's a much, much bigger pot. But it's quite an open race, I think.
Marie's Rock would essentially be stepping up from what can be termed in some quarters the intermediate trips. Now, it's not impossible for horses to do that in the States. Many, in fact, have done it in the past. English Drever, I think, springs to mind, but many haven't. And is it a case of until they run over it, you don't know?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 types, isn't there, when you're talking about horses' stamina? There's unproven, which in her case is what it is, and unsuited, which is when you've gone that trip before and you don't really reckon that you're going to go over it again. So yes, she's unproven. The thing that counts against me is that season where she was below par, when she was bordering on a fruitcake. I mean, she turned up at Newbury one day when she was racing off about high 130s, being thought of as a potential champion hurdle horse at that stage. She had speed and she just fretted her race away. She was very, very sweaty. So they've done a real good job to settle her down. But every time you go up in trip, usually the tempo slows. And that means if you're inclined to go a little bit faster than you want, you can pull. And that's my concern with her, is whether or not she will pull her way to defeat. Whereas she could stay if she gave herself a chance to, but maybe not. The interesting thing for the pace here is Dashel Drasher could run. I don't think he would be involved in the finish, but he could make things uncomfortable for Flooring Porter. And that brings in the likes of Home by the Lee and even Old Paisley Park. If they go really hard, we know that the tempos of championship races are what he needs. He is like Big Bucks, one of the horses that you mentioned, in terms he has a flat spot. If he hasn't hit his flat spot by the home turn, he won't win because he hits his flat spot and doesn't get back into it. But if they go a little bit harder earlier, then that would be a fantastic result. I can't see it at his age, but it's a very, very interesting tactical race, this, with no strong opinion from my side. I would stick with Flooring Porter. I'm very worried about Dashel Drasher going and pestering him early on, and hence him not getting the soft lead.
Paisley Park, it's an old chestnut, but there really would be no more popular winner.
No, I don't think so. One of the great things about national hunt racing is the ability of horses to come back year on year. We've got Shishkin on the same day in the Ryanair, you know, on his recovery message, and many will remember Sprinter Sacra's return to the highest table after the travails that he'd had. Now, Paisley Park has always been there. He hasn't gone anywhere. It's just that he's not quite as high a profile horse as he was in this division with the domination of the Irish. But yes, there are some people who will just be backing with their heart next week, and high on their list of horses I would imagine to part money with would be Paisley Park, because at the festival, he's rarely let them down.
Richard Hoiles has very kindly taken us through the big races at Cheltenham and a whole lot more. And now we come to the biggest of all, the Gold Cup. I always think, Richard, there's two types of Gold Cup winners. There's the consummate pros and what I call the Doctor Who horses, where you're hiding behind the sofa. And arguably, Galopin Des Champs is both of those.
Yes, I think he potentially is the horse that could stamp his authority on the division. But he is unproven at the trip. He looks as if he'll stay it. He stayed 3 miles over hurdles and all of that. And of course, going down to the last, if he is 2 lengths clear in the Gold Cup, everybody will flick back to that horrible moment as he crumpled on landing in the Turners 12 months ago. He didn't beat much that day because Bob Ollinger turned out not to be the opponent that we probably thought he was. But he hasn't done a great deal wrong since then. Whether he deserves to be quite such a short price, I'm not entirely convinced. I think he will stay, and his chances are improved if it doesn't become a bog, I think, because that's where his quality, as you say, the sort of professional side of it, would come to the fore. But if it did turn out to be in any way of attritional, either through ground or through pace, and you do have the likes of a Hoiles who's likely to be pushing on from quite a long way out, then I think he could be vulnerable to horses that might not have his raw ability, but maybe are more sort of battle-hardened in a slog. And top of that list for me would be Statler, who ran in the National Hunt Chase, proven over further, has crossed swords with Galopin Des Champs and was beaten in Ireland the other day, but at a pace and a trip that wouldn't suit him as well. And I think he's been campaigned cleverly by Willie. I think he started off in the same race that Album Photo did, right at the turn of the year. And I think he's just been brought along sort of gradually. I quite like him. A Plus Tard is, of course, the difficult one. You know, how do you assess the horse that won 12 months ago? We haven't seen much of him after that dismal performance in the Betfair. And there's plenty of Gold Cup winners, as you say, who haven't really done much since. There are also horses that won it a couple of times, but that's been the minority. Best Mate and Album Photo. So I'm interested to see how A Plus Tard strips fit in the paddock. And I suppose if it really, really, really came up soft, if you wanted a mad outsider, Royal Pagaille has been rather forgotten by everyone. He ran okay in the King George. It wouldn't have been the sort of conditions that would have been ideal for him. He does want soft ground, but his weight-carrying performance at Haydock last season was really, really creditable. And if it does come up muddy and dirty and attritional, then Statler and Royal Pagaille against Galopin Des Champs might be interesting.
I mean, you mentioned A Plus Tard. Obviously, Henry de Bromhead's run the last 2 runnings. Manila Indo, who may well run as well. And he really is one of those trainers who can almost bring horses back for these big meetings, these big races, seemingly on a whim, isn't he?
Yes, he hasn't had the best of seasons generally. They've picked up a couple of times, and some of his horses, not to say it's been a desperate season, but you've always just felt they could be in better form. They could be in better form. And so it will be interesting to watch some of those earlier runners from the stable earlier on in the week. We'll have had 3 days racing by the time we get here to see what sort of condition we might expect A Plus Tard to turn up in. He definitely has pleased connections in the last 3 or 4 weeks. There's no doubt the vibes are far more positive than the sort of hopefully will run. So I think he will be prepared. But what went wrong at Haydock, you know, and what impact does that have on a quality horse that just checked out so tamely? And that would be my worry. I would like to have seen him once more at the Dublin Racing Festival to allay my fitness, but also just to allay the fact that whatever had ailed him at Haydock was out of his system.
And very briefly, going back to the favourite Galopin Des Champs, Ruby Walsh has come out and said, basically, you know, he not quite thinks it's the second coming, but not far off that. And again, looking at things from a betting perspective, quite rightly, his words will take effect, won't they?
Absolutely, particularly as his association with the stable. And Brave Man's Game will be talked up by Paul Nicholls as well. I do have doubts, as seemingly everyone does, about Brave Man's Game's ability to cope with sort of the undulations of Cheltenham as opposed to being the King George. And Paul Nicholls has tended to target races outside the festival during the course of the season for his main horses. He hasn't had a festival winner since Politolog in 2020. So he's interesting as well. You could throw in Noble Yates, Conflated, whether he'll stay, and Protectorat, who, let's face it, was best of the British last year when coming home to be placed. and Dan Skelton said he thought he'd left him short in the Cotswolds. So maybe he's capable of better display. But he could be the class act Galopin des Champs, but I would like to see that happen before I took the sort of 7-4 we're talking about. And I'd have a lower stake each way on Statler, who I think will be involved in the finish, but might just find 1-2 speedy if it doesn't come up soft.
Richard Hoiles is very kindly be giving us his thoughts on Cheltenham, and now almost to round things up. I don't know what to call this, Richard. We've asked you for a best bet, but I'll let your modesty prevail. Is it a best bet or a banker?
Okay, well, we'll do a banker. We'll do the banker being the short price one that we think will win. So underpin all your multiples, and that's Delta Work in the dreaded cross country. Galvin could take him on. He, of course, was the party pooper last year where he beat Tiger Roll, but he is a class act over those obstacles. And as long as it doesn't come up too quick, and I don't think it will, then I think he will prove to be best on the day. Now, I'm not telling anyone anything they probably couldn't pick out themselves. He's around about even money 11-10. But I do think if you're asking about one of those short price favourites that I think will win, I think he has a better chance related to the price than the likes of Shishkin and Mighty Potter, etc. As regards the other best bets, I tend to look at the handicaps. A horse called Mill Green, who runs in the Pertemps, is a good healthy price, was third last year. He's now 11 years of age, which will put a lot of people off, as will the fact that Nicky Henderson has about 5 in the race, and he's probably the longest price of those. But Nicky gave him a positive mention the other night, unprompted, when I was talking to him about some of the shorter priced horses. And if you look at his record in big handicaps, then he does okay, placed at Liverpool as well in a big field. And those sort of tempos, I think, are really interesting. So I think he is definitely one that I would consider at a slightly longer price. I do tend to like horses that have run and placed in races in the past. And I think in the very first day in the Ultima, there's a horse called Happy Go Lucky of Kim Bailey's stable haven't been going well. And also in the same race, Fantasticus, who I don't think will get in. Both of those are interesting as well. Happy Go Lucky's round about 12-1 as we speak. I don't think Fantasticus will get in. But if you're watching this before Non-Runner No Bet on the Tuesday, then that's definitely one just to have on the right side, and you get your money back if it doesn't run. So the nap of the week would be Delta Work. The hope is that Constitution Hill wins in a manner that makes betting irrelevant, and we can all say we were there when he won the first of 3 champion hurdles, the dawning of an absolute superstar. But pick clever in the handicaps, look for horses that have run well. Happy Go Lucky in the Ultima and Milgrim in the Pertemps will be top of my list.
A few things to say there. First of all, if you ever see me in Pauper's Prison, it's thanks to Fantasticus. I've got to tell you that.
Well, the run against Corret Rambler last year, they went really fast and he still finished 7th. He's dropped a long way with no signs of resurgence, probably too far because he won't get in. So, yes, is he one of your cliff horses? You might follow him one more time if he gets in.
Thanks for not making the bank of the Irish and the Presbury Cup. I mean, I think we could do without Thomas on shots as well. Just very quickly, any other special, but one I like purely as just a little bit of fun throughout the week is to back a winner there to be a winner 50-1 or more. Then if my selection's invariably out the back, I've got a few I can cheer on.
Yeah, when you're looking at the last, as I do often into the Coral Cup, thinking, what the hell's that? You know, and it crops up as 40-1 or 50-1 sort of. It's quite nice to have winning distances or things that you might like. I think in terms of markets, one that was pointed out to me the other day, again, short price one, is JP McManus to be top owner, which I think with a couple of firms that have those prices, he's around about even money. I think under all calculations, particularly with Isaac Swade and Simon Monier having lost one of their horses in terms of ability to turn up at Cheltenham this very day, I think that's one that they haven't explored enough. But unfortunately, top trainer is going to be Willie. As a result, top jockey will almost certainly be Paul Townend, and that does take out some of those angles. But it is nice to have maybe the number of English winners, or British winners, I should say, that we'll have during the course of the 4 days, and we'll probably do well to get to double figures, unfortunately.
Richard, I can't thank you enough for joining us and giving us your pearls of wisdom. Looking forward to a brilliant Cheltenham, and all I can say is that I hope the racing lives up to the commentary.
Thank you. I hope it's the other way around as well, because the racing's fantastic. The commentary is more variable. But thanks to everyone. Hope you have a really good 4 days. And at the moment, the pearls of wisdom still perfectly plausible. Play it back at the end of the week, and you can just roll around laughing.